The Romans landed in Britain in the year 43. They found an island that was already old, already full, already crowded with tribes who had farmed these valleys and buried their kings under these hills for thousands of years before a single legion set foot on the beach. History remembers the Romans because the Romans wrote it down. But the people they conquered were here first, and against every odd, a handful of them left something behind that outlasted Rome itself. Not a monument, not a road, a name. And if you carry one of these names, the blood behind it was standing on this island watching those Roman ships come in. By the end of this, you will know whether yours is one of them. Let me be honest with you first, because the one thing this channel will never do is insult the people who actually know their history. No surname on earth literally existed before the Romans. Fixed family names, the kind you inherit and pass down, did not arrive in Britain until more than 1,000 years after Rome fell. So when I say a name is older than the Romans, I do not mean the surname was being written down while Caesar was alive. I mean something better. I mean the root of the name, the word it is built from, the ancient British person it first described, was alive in the mouths of the Britons before the Romans ever came. The surname is medieval. The thing underneath it is not. And once you understand that difference, you can look at an ordinary name in a modern phone book and see straight through it, 1,000 years deep, to the people the Romans called barbarians and never truly conquered. Because here is what most people were never taught. The Romans took the south. They took the towns and the roads and the villa country. But they never broke the west. The mountains of Wales, the moors of Cornwall, the high country of the Old North. Those places kept their language, their names, and their bloodlines when the rest of the island was being remade. The tongue those people spoke has a name: Brythonic, the ancestor of Welsh and Cornish, and the names that grew out of it are the oldest living things in the British Isles. So let us go find them, and you watch for yours. Start with the one that ends the argument before it begins. Craddock. If your name is Craddock or Craddock or any spelling near it, you are carrying the name of a man who fought the Romans to their faces. Caradoc, a British war leader who led the resistance against the legions in the 1st century, who was betrayed and dragged to Rome in chains, and who, according to the Romans themselves, stood before the emperor and spoke so well that they spared his life. His name in the Old British tongue became Caradoc, and Caradoc became Craddock. That is not a name that dates to before the Romans in some vague way. That is the name of the specific man standing on the specific hill fighting the specific invasion. If you are a Craddock, say it in the comments now, because your name is a battle cry the Romans wrote down 2,000 years ago. Stay with me, because the next names are quieter, but they run just as deep. And this is exactly the kind of history this channel lives for. Subscribe if you want your own name read this way. Take the color names, because the Britons named each other the way people always have, by how they looked. Gwyn, and every name built on it, comes from the Brythonic word for white or fair. Lloyd comes from Lloyd, meaning gray. Gethin comes from the word for dark or swarthy. Vaughan, one of the most common of all, comes from Fichin, meaning small or younger, the tag they hung on the son who shared his father's name. These are not English words dressed up. They are the actual descriptions the ancient Britons used for one another, frozen into surnames 1,000 years later and carried right up to today. If your name is Lloyd or Gwyn or Vaughan or Gethin, the word behind it was being spoken on this island before Rome was even an empire. Now the names of the old kings and heroes, because some of these surnames are built on personal names, so old their origins are genuinely lost. Meredith comes from an ancient Welsh name that scholars trace to a form that is, in their own words, certainly pre-Roman. Its meaning points to greatness and lordship, and it was worn by princes centuries before it became a surname you might see on a mailbox today. Maddock and Maddox come from Madog, an old British personal name meaning generous. Cadwallader comes from Cadwallader, an early Welsh hero whose name means battle leader. These were not invented in the Middle Ages. They were inherited by the Middle Ages, passed down from a world the Romans found already ancient. And the land itself remembers, because some of the oldest names are not about people at all. They are about place. The rivers of Britain carry some of the oldest names on the island, names the Britons gave the water that the Romans simply copied down, and the Anglo-Saxons never bothered to change. The Thames. The Avon, which is just the Brythonic word for river. The Usk. The Exe. Families that took their names from these rivers and these ancient hills are standing on a foundation older than any invasion. If your surname comes from a British river, or a Welsh mountain, or a Cornish valley, drop it below, because the ground your name came from was named by people who watched the Romans arrive and outlasted them. So the names are old. But a name can be adopted, and this is where the skeptics rightly push. So let us go to the one thing that cannot be borrowed: the blood. And this is where the real proof lives. In 2015, a team out of Oxford University published in the journal Nature the most detailed genetic map of the British Isles ever made. They did something clever. They took DNA only from people whose 4 grandparents were all born within a few miles of each other, which meant they were reading the genetic map of Britain as it was before the modern age scrambled everyone together. They were looking, in effect, at the deep past, and what they found rewrote the story of who the British are. The first thing they proved is that there is no single Celtic gene. The Welsh, the Cornish, the Scots, the Northern Irish, they are not one people. They are distinct, and they are distinct because they were never fully mixed by the waves that washed over the rest of the island. And the second thing they found is the one that matters for your name. The people of Wales, especially the North, carry the oldest genetic layer in Britain. They are, in the words of the researchers, probably descended from the earliest settlers to arrive after the last ice age. When later migrations swept across the island, one great movement of people crossing the sea after the ice age but before the Romans, that ancestry spread through England and Scotland and Northern Ireland. But it barely touched Wales. The mountains held. The old blood stayed. Then came the Anglo-Saxons, and the study measured them too. Across much of eastern and central England, they contributed a huge share of the ancestry, in some places up to half. But in Wales, that Anglo-Saxon signal fades to almost nothing, which means the people of the Welsh mountains and the Cornish moors are carrying a bloodline that runs underneath the Anglo-Saxons, underneath the Vikings, underneath the Romans, all the way down to the original Britons. The invaders wrote the history. But in the West, the conquered kept the blood. And the names grew out of that blood, in that language, in those hills. So put the name and the blood together, and you get something extraordinary. A Craddock in the valleys is not just carrying a medieval surname. He may be carrying the name of Craddockus and the DNA of the people Craddockus died fighting for, in the same body, in the same place, 2,000 years on. A Lloyd, a Gwyn, a Meredith from deep Welsh country is a living thread back to a world the Romans invaded and never erased. That is not a DNA kit fantasy. That is the actual finding of an actual Oxford study, standing behind the actual meaning of an actual name. But let me give you the honest boundary, the same as always, because it is the honesty that separates this from the slop. A Welsh surname is not a certificate of ancient blood. Names traveled, People moved into Wales and out of it, married in, took the language and the names without the ancestry. And plenty of people with the oldest British blood carry ordinary English names today because a surname is only the last 1,000 years of a story that is 10 times longer than that. The name is not the proof, the name is the door. It tells you which house to go looking in. What is behind the door is a question only the deeper record, the blood and the parish books and the patient tracing can finally answer. And that is exactly why these names are worth knowing, because everyone else on this island is carrying a name that arrived with somebody. The Anglo-Saxon names came on boats in the 5th century. The Norman names came with a conquest in the 11th. The Viking names came off longships. Almost every surname in Britain is, at bottom, the mark of an arrival, a name that came from somewhere else and landed here. But not these. The Brythonic names did not arrive. They were already here. They are the only names in Britain that were not brought by an invader because they belong to the people the invaders found waiting. Every other name is a story of coming to Britain. These are the names of Britain itself. So think about what that means the next time you say one out loud. If your name is Craddock, or Lloyd, or Gwyn, or Meredith, or Vaughan, or Maddock, or Cadwallader, you are not the descendant of someone who showed up. You are the descendant of someone who was already standing here when the ships came, generation after generation, holding the same valleys and the same words, while empires arrived and aged and fell away around them. The Romans came and built and left. The name stayed. The Saxons came and conquered and settled. The name stayed. 1,000 years of history rolled over these islands, and the name your family carries was underneath all of it the entire time, waiting, the way the mountains waited, for you to finally ask what it meant. The Romans wrote themselves into history. Your ancestors just refused to leave it. So tell me your name and tell me where it is from. If it is a Craddock or a Craddock, if it is a Lloyd or a Gwyn or a Gethin, a Vaughan, a Meredith, a Maddock, a Cadwallader, if it comes off a Welsh mountain or a Cornish valley or an ancient British river, say it and say the county it comes from, because the people watching want to see how many of the old names are still here. And if your family always said they were Welsh or Cornish, or from the old country in the West, say that loudest of all, because you may be carrying the oldest living names on this island. Subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors. Every week we go deeper into the names and the blood people carry without ever knowing what they survived. The next bloodline is already waiting.